Yes, everybody, I know we're a bit late, but here we are. Colin's going to do a study for us.
All right, well, good afternoon. The study is simply that, as you're aware, I wasn't here this morning because I was at my own church, because I had to take the Sabbath school lesson, which was Revelation chapter 12, and I offered to Adrian to share that with you this afternoon. And he kindly accepted my offer, so I stand before you. So this is not, this is not an in-depth study of Revelation chapter 12. As you know, in a Sabbath school class we have a bit over half an hour. I should point out I do have an able backup in the room because another person here was also helping out with the Sabbath school lesson at my same church, Hannah.
Oh, come on, Hannah.
So Hannah might be able to help me too as well to get through this. So Hannah taught the youth class and I had one of the senior classes inside the church. And because it is the whole chapter, 17 verses, in about 35 minutes, we will not get into a great deal of depth. But we'll try and touch on every verse. So let's open our Bibles to Revelation chapter 12. Just to show me you're all still awake, we'll read a little bit of this.
So you want us to start up here?
Well, maybe we'll just read right to the chapter first so we can see the whole chapter, and then we'll come back and pull some of the verses apart. Yes, that's okay. Great, thank you.
And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars.
And she, being a child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered.
And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads.
And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born.
And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne.
And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,203 days.
And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought, and his angels.
But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer.
And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceived the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him.
And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night.
And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death.
Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time.
And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child.
And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent.
And the serpent cast out his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood.
And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth.
And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ.
Okay, thank you. So, I asked my class this morning, if we had to give this chapter a title, other than the title that the lesson gave it, what might be the title for this chapter?
Satan cast to earth.
In my Bible, it's got several, but a woman in travail.
Yes. Yeah. Well, in his book, The Story of the Seer of Patmos, it's chapter 13 in the book, which deals with chapter 12 of Revelation, Stephen Haskell called the chapter The Great Controversy.
Good stuff.
And this is what he said about it on page 217. He says, only the mountain peaks in the history of the Christian church are revealed in this view. There is the glorious rising of the sun, then a lapse of over 500 years, the days of papal tyranny and the persecution are shown when the woman was in the wilderness for 1260 years. And the last peak is when the sun again shines upon the remnant church in all its splendour. So it's the great controversy in summary form, just hitting three really high points through the great story of the great controversy. So with that thought in mind, that this chapter is about the great controversy, let's now have a bit of a look, a little bit more detail. So we won't go into huge detail. So Revelation 12:1 and 2, and John sees what he calls a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head the crown of 12 stars. So this is speaking symbolically. Don't normally go outside and see a woman in the heavens, do we? So this is obviously symbolic language. So then we need to understand what these symbols mean. A woman in Bible prophecy. What does a woman represent in Bible prophecy?
Church.
Right, how do we know that?
Jeremiah 6:2.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Jeremiah 6:2? Yep. What does that one say?
I've likened my people to a comely and delicate woman.
Comely and delicate woman, that's right, yes. And there are a number of others, 2 Corinthians 11:12, Jeremiah 3:14, Hosea 2:19, Ephesians 5:23 to 32, where particularly those verses where God is saying he's married to his people. So the woman is represents the church. And in Revelation 17 we see another woman representing a church, but she's of a different ilk. And she is dressed differently with blasphemous names, so we understand that an impure woman represents an apostate church, whereas a pure woman represents the true church. And I was blessed in my Sabbath school class this morning because the entire class understood that the Bible is its own expositor, and we had no disagreements over any of the guys presenting in this chapter. So it was a great blessing, let me tell you. So when I studied for this, to prepare this lesson for them, I was heavily influenced by Stephen Haskell and the story of the Seer of Patmos, and Uriah Smith with the Daniel Revelation. Now Hannah, I believe you in your class mentioned Uriah Smith, and a number of the young people had never heard of him. Isn't that interesting? And nor had they heard of Stephen Haskell, I'm guessing. Yeah, so we've got a whole generation coming through, and they're not hearing about these pioneering people and the work that they produced. So how can they be anchored into truth?
One of the deacons at my church was my age and been an Adventist his whole life, and he'd never heard of Stephen Haskell.
Wow.
When I was with
Or his book.
When I was with the ministers,
Yeah.
I asked them if they'd ever heard of or seen the 1872 Fundamental Principle Statement.
Right.
They'd never heard of it, nor read it.
Wow.
None of them.
Wow. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Even I was a bit alarmed at that.
Yes, yeah, well you would be.
I grew up in the church and we were never shown, I don't know what you remember, but I don't remember ever being shown the fundamental beliefs of the church, even though they were drawn up in 1931.
Mm.
No, I never saw them.
I'm there at Burnham.
Amazing,
I'm
isn't
there
it?
at Burnham.
Yes, it is. Let me just get something up for you for a moment.
The only reason we knew of Stephen Haskell was because one of the, in Mangere Adventist High School, one of the house groups
Yes.
was called Haskell.
I was in Haskell.
There's also Haskell Park.
And there was Haskell Park where we used to
We'll be
have
trying to
tennis.
beat the daylights out of the other students in the name of Haskell.
Smith and Haskell.
Yeah.
Where Loughborough?
Yeah, without necessarily knowing who they are. Yeah. Yeah, I was actually blessed in the little church I grew up in. We actually were taught denominational history. So I did have a reasonable grasp of it, so these names weren't exactly foreign to me. I'll just share with you a couple of things. Some of you have heard this, but just to reinforce the point about Stephen Haskell, that we have good reason. Here it is. I just sent this to Eddie just a little while ago. A couple of quotes I found in regards to Stephen Haskell. This is Mrs. White writing. First one's in letter 89 of 1897. She's talking about Stephen Haskell coming from South Africa, I think at the time, to help her here in Australia in her work. I won't read the whole quote, but this is the bit at the bottom they put in dark type. Saith the Lord. So who said it?
The Lord.
The Lord. Brother Haskell is my servant, appointed to work under my directions, which he will obey, to teach the truth for this time, and I will be with his mouth, and I will give him my word, and he shall be your helper to carry out my instructions. So this is the word of God to Mrs. White about Stephen Haskell.
What year did?
This was 1897. And that was letter 89 of 1897, and then letter 99 of 1897. She says similar things, and she talked about how brother and sister Haskell are a great help to her. Then she says again, I have provided, speaking, quoting God, I have provided help in my servant, which is brother Haskell. I will be with his mouth, and he shall speak my word, and it shall prosper. So, can we rely on the word of Stephen Haskell when we read the story of the Sea of Patmos? Will we be blessed by reading it and using it as the basis of our study?
That's amazing.
Isn't it amazing?
Quotes existed.
No. They're not the usual thing you hear from the pulpit at church.
No, that's good.
So, yes, it is, isn't it?
Mm.
So when we read these things, God had a high regard for his servant Stephen Haskell, because it tells us about Stephen Haskell was obviously a teachable spirit and one that was completely committed to the service to his God.
But through the lens of the church, he would be an anti-Trinitarian, which means that
The modern church would reject him outright because he taught against the creed. Exactly right.
Mrs. White made a similar statement about Loughborough.
Loughborough, yeah.
History.
Yes, she did. She did. And in fact, the word of God came to Mrs. White, and she passed it on to Stephen Haskell to write. I think the intention was they would be smaller books, but to write a book on Daniel and a book on Revelation, and which he did. Probably bigger studies, and the study style, if anyone's got them, they're an amazing book. Both columns have got heaps and heaps of references to other texts. He'll make a sentence, he'll state something, a couple of sentences, and there's a reference out to the side for it. It's just a great study material.
Certainly can get lost in Bible study, do it?
You could very easily get lost in Bible study doing it. It's a tremendous study put together. So some of these texts I got from references that I just read out were references in that book, The Story of the Sea of Patmos. The other book's called The Story of Daniel the Prophet. I have both of them, read both of them, they're great books. All right, so this woman, so we worked out this woman represents the church. And she's clothed in the sun. Now what is it we understand is the clothing of God's people? They're clothed with what?
The righteousness of Christ.
The robe of Christ's righteousness. Which is what? Which is his character, which is his Father's character. So turn to Isaiah 61 verse 10. Now, who did we go up to? Whose turn was it?
Back in the other.
Back to you, okay?
I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My soul shall be joyful in my God. For he hath clothed me with the garment of salvation. He hath covered me with the robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom decketh himself with ornaments, and as a bride adorned herself with jewels.
Right, so he's clothed me with the garments of, and then explains what they are, which is the robe of righteousness. Now this woman that John is seeing is clothed with the sun. Now we know the clothing of the church is the robe of Christ's righteousness. So how do we link this with the sun? Well, we go to Malachi chapter 4 and verse 2. That's it.
But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and he shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall.
Okay, so just letting the Bible be its own expositor, what we can see, the sun, she's clothed with the sun. Christ is the Son of Righteousness. The clothing of his people is his robe of righteousness. So we can see the clothing she's wearing is the righteousness of Jesus Christ. So we're happy with that. So she's got the standing on the moon. Now, at this point, what he's seeing, this woman with this dress with the clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, crown with 12 stars on her head. She's heavy with child and about to deliver this child, who we understand to be Christ. So if this woman represents the church, it's representing the church at the time just before Christ was born. Would you agree? And there were faithful ones in Israel looking for the Messiah. We know that. There was Simeon in the temple. There was Anna. There was Mary and Joseph. There was the shepherds, the wise men from the east. We understand the disciples knew that the coming of the Messiah was close. They had no difficulty with it. So there was the faithful, not in the leadership. Pretty hard to find in the leadership, but in the membership there's Nicodemus. Yeah. But generally it's the membership. They were looking for the coming of the Messiah. Didn't have the right understanding, but they knew he was coming.
It was interesting when the leadership were asked, they actually found out where he was to be born.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And Herod asked the question. They actually knew. So, if this represents the church at that time, just prior to the birth of Christ, so the Jewish church, this woman is standing on the moon. So when you're standing on something, that's the foundation, isn't it? What was the foundation of the Jewish religion? What did they have that showed them the everlasting covenant? What was given to them?
Sacrifice system.
The sanctuary.
The sanctuary. The sanctuary. And Steve Haster makes the point here, the moon representing the sanctuary service, the foundation of the Jewish religion, reflecting the light, it's the type, not the antitype. The brilliance is in the antitype. The type reflects the brilliance of the antitype, but in a way that people can understand it, people can receive it. So that was the pioneer view. Uriah Smith said something very similar.
I was going to say, Colin, that's one way to look at it.
There's one way to look at it. There are others.
And there are others. But
exactly right.
It's valid.
It's valid. The other way I put to my class was that we can't look at the Father. He's too bright. But his glory reflects from Christ to us in a way that we can receive it. The woman standing on the foundation, Christ is the chief cornerstone. So could in fact this moon also be Christ, the foundation of the church, the cornerstone of the church, who reflects the light from the Father to his people in a way that they can receive it. And they all thought, yes, that is another way of looking at it.
And the other way is that the sun and the moon are the ways that we determine the Moedim, in which we receive the Spirit,
Yeah,
and in which we receive the righteousness of Christ.
true.
There's
Yeah.
that element.
There's
as
that
well.
element as well. That's right. So it's very multifaceted. All right, so the crown, 12 stars. Certainly our pioneer understanding was they believed represented the 12 apostles, who, even though weren't in that role yet, it recognises that the church would move into to look, I guess, different to what it did in the Jewish economy, and it was the 12 apostles that were to be the fathers to establish, spiritual fathers to establish this church. One of the people in the class said her understanding has always been that the stars were the 12 tribes of Israel, thereby linking the true church back to Israel. So the interesting thoughts. Right, so verse 2, and she being with child cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered, which we know, of course, is referring to the forthcoming birth of Christ, and indeed the birth of the Christian church, because the same language could be used for it, particularly the birth of Christ. Now, Revelation, so verse 3, and there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. Now, we don't actually have to guess the identity of this dragon, because verse 9 clearly tells us the dragon is Satan. So, but it's a red dragon. So this also, and it has 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns. So there's some things there which identify where this dragon fits in history. As we know, the prevailing world power at the time of the birth of Christ was Rome. We know that Rome, on their standards in battle, had as one of their symbols was a great red dragon. And there are a lot of other ideas about what the 7 heads. Rome was built on the 7 hills. There's a whole lot of other symbolisms going on there. So I think.
So what Smith and Haskell say that one of their symbols was a red dragon.
I think I read it in.
I must have missed it.
I read it. May not be one of those two. It might have been church history. Somewhere I've read it that one of the symbols on their standards was a red dragon.
Okay.
Yeah. Because why red dragon? Why would John see a red dragon? Why not a brown dragon? Why not a white dragon? Why not a black dragon? Why red?
It's all about frequency, vibration, and
That's it. Yes.
Most dragons are red though. If you look at the
Yes, interesting. All the
they
illustrations.
seem to always be
Yes,
red.
the illustrations you see about dragons, they're red, except for the one for St George Bank. It's green.
There you go.
Yeah.
He's a friendly dragon.
He's a friendly dragon. That's right. That's right.
It's Puff.
Well, yeah, Puff was friendly too. We don't know what colour he was, do we?
I'm just looking that up.
He might have
You
been.
guys had Loughborough and Haskell, but Emerald Catholic School had a red dragon.
Right.
Really?
Praise God, Nathan was not in dragons.
Yeah. Wow.
Red dragon.
So yes, a red,
Not
not by coincidence, I would suggest.
No, not very subtle.
Hmm. All right, now, so the dragon, Satan, was at the time pagan Rome was the world leader, and so that was the vehicle whereby Satan was exerting the most influence, I guess, over the world, and particularly over Israel at the time that Christ was going to be born, because he knew the prophecies, he knew what was going to happen.
It's like in Daniel 10, where Gabriel says to Daniel that he's been wrestling with the prince of Persia.
Yes.
And of course, Satan has control of Persia.
Yes.
Same with Rome.
Yes, that's
the
right.
Prince of Rome.
Prince of Rome.
Satan.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so verse 4. Now this one we get there's a couple of ways of interpreting this verse as well. Let's read it. And his tail, this is the dragon, and his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and had cast them to the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Right. Now, a couple of ways of looking at this. One is that this then takes John's view back to heaven. So let's look at that one first. So first of all, the tail. Why the tail? Tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven. Why didn't he put his arm around the third part of the stars of heaven and bring them down with his hand? Why the tail?
Reference to light.
Turn to Isaiah chapter 9, verses 14 and 15. This is very insightful, if you haven't read this before. Isaiah chapter 9, verses 14 and 15. Whose turn? It's Jenny, is it? When you get there.
Alright, 9, what, 14, 15?
14 and 15.
Therefore the Lord will cut off from Israel head and tail, branch and rush in one day. The ancient and honourable, he is the head, and the prophet that teaches lies, he is the tail.
Okay, so what's the tail?
Prophet.
Prophet that teaches lies. How did Lucifer in heaven attract a third of the angels to himself?
Nice.
He lied. So we can see that's one interpretation that fits. Now, also when you read Haskell, and I think Haskell can see both interpretations are valid. The other one is, and this is really interesting, and Uriah Smith took this view as well.
Yeah.
Herod was the last king. He was only king of Israel because Rome allowed him to be king, and he was a tributary, but he was a king. In the Jewish economy, we had the king, they had the Sanhedrin, they had the priests. And that was basically the rulership. So 3 stars of heaven. Now, Herod, in great wisdom, it seems, in his first will, he appointed Antipas to be the king after him. In his second will, he appointed, who was the other son? Archelaus. So when Herod died, we have 2 pretenders to the throne. So Rome had to decide. And my notes in order here. All right, so they had to decide through Rome. Rome, and Stephen Haskell addresses this. Rome gave Archelaus the title, and then we can read it in the Gospels of Tetrarch, I think it is.
Ethnarch.
Ethnarch.
Was a tetrarch.
Right, Ethnarch, that's right.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're right, Lester, Ethnarch.
So he
Yes.
wasn't a king.
No, wasn't king. Wasn't king. And he never became king. He was promised that if he was a good boy, he'd be king. But he wasn't a good boy, so he wasn't king. And so, effectively, Rome took away one of the stars of heaven. They only left with the Sanhedrin, basically, and the priesthood. They lost their king as such. And so that's the other way of looking at it. It's very interesting, this one, because turn to Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 16.
Was that the lies that Rome was telling them?
Now that's an interesting point. We'll get back to that in a moment. Isaiah chapter 7 verse 16. Thanks, Lynn.
For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings.
This is a prophecy about Jesus, at his birth. So when he's very, very young, it says before he knows to refuse evil and to choose good, so very, very young child, the land will be forsaken of both her kings. And that's what happened. Neither Antipas nor Archelaus became king. Now the question is, of course, Adrian's just raised, and I don't know enough about the history to know whether it's true or not, to remove that 1/3 of the stars of heaven Rome had to be, or someone had to lie and be deceitful, because that's the tale, and that's what the tale does. Now that I don't know whether anyone else knows, but if for that to be the case, that to be a valid interpretation, and our pioneers are quite happy that it was, then presumably there was some sort of deceit or lie involved, and I don't know.
As Lester said, to be a mediator or an arbitrator, you have to lie.
True. True. Very true. Very true. Mind you, could Herod himself have been deceitful? The two wills not cancelling one or the other, thereby
yeah.
it could not, it's not necessarily going to be Augustus at fault here. It could be come from Herod, the result of him, that they end up not having a king.
Did you say that Rome promised one of them that he's a good
Archelaus was told, yes, you'll read that in...
They obviously lied to him.
So, he had to be good. He had to behave, and he didn't. History shows
didn't.
He did not behave to the standard that Augustus expected, so I think it was still Augustus then,
okay.
Yes, it was Augustus at the time of the birth of Christ.
Yes.
Yes, and so for that reason he didn't. So they're the two interpretations of the tale drawing a third of the stars of heaven. Both valid, I would have to think. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. All right, did Satan attempt to kill Christ when he was born? Yes, how?
Herod and all the babies under 2 years old.
That's right, and that was prophesied, Rachel weeping for her children. And so yes, then resulting was that Mary and Joseph had to take the baby and go to Egypt. And that also, God knew that would happen because as the prophecy said, I call my son out of Egypt. So you can see all these prophecies fulfilling. It's just amazing, isn't it? So, but during the life of Christ, there are also many attempts to kill him. Remember, early in his ministry, he went back to Nazareth. They didn't like what he's preaching, so what did they do? Dragged him out of the city, dragged him up the hill. They're going to throw him over the cliff and kill him. How many times we read about the Jews picking up stones, particularly when he talked to them about telling them he was the Son of God. Picked up stones to kill him.
And Desire of Ages mentions about when Jesus is lost for 3 days from Mary and Joseph when he was 12 years old. They had forgotten about how Satan had tried to kill him when he was 2 years old.
Yes, yes. Yep. So Satan tried to kill Christ exactly as the prophecy said. Mind you, it's looking back. Right, so now verse 5. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Now that one verse covers about 33 years.
Yeah.
Because Christ walked on this earth for 33 years. And then he was crucified. And we know the death that he died on the cross was the death of eternal non-existence. It was the wages of sin, which is death, not sleep. But because there was no sin in him, death in the grave couldn't hold him, and so God was able to raise him back up again. And then after 40 days, with his disciples, he ascended to heaven. Which is exactly the description in verse 5. Now verse 6 says, And the woman fled in the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So here we now have a jump of about 500 years. So we are now at what's generally taken to be the beginning of the 1260 years, which is March of 538 AD. Now, why is that significant? Well, Justinian, who was the emperor in Constantinople, the Eastern Empire, remember the Western Empire at this stage pretty well didn't exist, certainly didn't have a king or an emperor as such. His general Belisarius went in North Africa and defeated the Vandals. He then came through Italy to defeat the Goths and the barbarians. And so in 538 AD, for the first time in 60 years, the Bishop of Rome, well, for the first time in 60 years, the city of Rome was free of barbarian control. And so the Bishop of Rome, who had already been appointed by Justinian to be the top ecclesiastical person in Christendom, he assumed the leadership and began to rule Rome in Rome. And so we have established then at that point the beginning of the papacy. And that is taken, the history tells us, that was in March of 538 AD. So, and Haskell says that's why it's taken to be the beginning of the 1260 years. So, the woman being persecuted, the true church, and we know because of the difference in beliefs, and they were persecuted, and the woman, and we know through this book, Truth Triumphant, tracks that through the Waldenses and the Huguenots and all the various people that were, groups of people that were persecuted. But that was for a period of 1260 years. So if the beginning of the papal persecution is March of 538 AD, we add on 1260 years, there would have to be an event occur in February of 1798 for this prophecy to work. Hasn't it? Otherwise it's not 1260 years. It's a bit more or a bit less. So it's got to be in February of that year, agree?
Well, that would be the end of the 1260 years.
That's right, but we need an event. We need an event to prove it.
General birth year.
That's it. February 10 of 1798. Louis Berthier. He was a Huguenot.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, not necessarily a good Christian.
Not necessarily a good Christian, but the heritage was there. So what love did a Huguenot have for Rome?
Even in my mother's generation, they didn't have a lot of love either.
No.
Being a shrewd politician, Napoleon knew he'd do his job.
That's right, and he did it, and he did very, very well. So on the 10th of February, 1798, Louis Berthier, with his army, entered Rome and took Pope Pius VI prisoner and took him out of Rome. They moved north, they stayed in a number of places, eventually moving into southern France, and the Pope died a little while after. And so, we haven't got to this yet, but the next, Revelation 13, I think we'll hear about the deadly wound, which is taken to be the physical application of the deadly wound. So the prophecy is very accurate, isn't it? We can see they all it all fits together.
So Colin, just is there any more fleshing out in verse 5 of that man-child ruling all nations with a rod of iron?
Well, there is, but I didn't for the purpose of the lesson I was doing, and because of what I was trying to cover. There's other things I was looking to get through as well. But yes, so you have some thoughts on that? You have some thoughts you want to throw in?
No, I'm just musing over it.
Yeah.
That's what my sermon was about. Because the human concepts of justice,
yeah,
he has to rule
with a rod of iron. Yes.
As a god of jealousy.
Yeah.
That's why iron, brass is not gold and silver. It means you're in the old covenant. The heavens will be brass, the earth will be iron under your feet.
Under your feet, that's right, yes.
Because the world is in the old covenant.
Yeah.
He rules them with as a god of jealousy.
Yes, I had thought about that because there are a number of references to the rod of iron, not just this verse. But no, I didn't go into a great deal of depth on that one. Now, okay, so, and now we have another flashback. So John has seen the church being persecuted, and his mind is then taken to, in verse 7, 8 and 9, we see about war in heaven, which is why so many people link the verse 3, the tail drawing down a third of the stars, to be Satan in heaven, because here we have a little bit later more of explanation of what actually happened in heaven. Verses 7, 8 and 9, there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragons fought and his angels and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him.
This is where the divine pattern is very helpful in terms of the source and channel. Same with the dragon taking a third of the stars with his tail. That's the source. Ellen White tells us the controversy that began in heaven was come to earth and repeated. So it's manifested. The invisible is made visible.
Yes.
And this is the same, where you have the woman, the dragon, and the seed. And then here, it's referring back to the Garden of Eden, the woman, the dragon, and the seed.
That's it, yes.
It's the same
yeah,
thing.
that's it. Yeah, the dragon called a serpent in the garden, but essentially it's the same beast. Yes, thank you. So Haskell made the comment that at this point John's attention is drawn to the history of Satan, who is the one behind the cruel treatment of Christ and his church. Now, verse 9, look at this for a moment. So Satan is physically cast out of heaven in verse 9. The great dragon was cast out, the verse says. Question is this the only time he was cast out or cast down to the earth?
If you're speaking in divine pattern, there's twice, once at the cross.
Yes, let's turn to Luke chapter 10, verse 18.
Satan falls lightning from heaven.
Yes. And just look at when Jesus said that. So someone's got it to read it.
It's after the 70 returned.
It is after the 70 returned. So let's come and read verse 18 of Luke 10.
And he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven.
Exactly. And this was when, if we read the verses before, this is when the 70 had gone out. And they came back and they were really excited. Even the devils obey us, they said to him. And Jesus said, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Now, just hold that thought for a moment and we'll go, I'll read you something from Youth Instructor, June 21, 1900, paragraph 4. God bowed his head satisfied. Now justice and mercy could blend. Now he could be just and yet the justifier of all who should believe on Christ. He looked upon the victim expiring on the cross and said, it is finished. The human race shall have another trial. The redemption price was paid and Satan fell like lightning from heaven. And we know from other places in Spirit of Prophecy that there are still question marks in the minds of some of the unfallen beings.
What was that reference again, sorry, Colin?
That was the Youth Instructor of June 21 of 1900. Paragraph 4. The whole article is so worth reading. It's just brilliant. So when they saw it may even have Haskell said it so well. Just see if I can quickly find it. We'll quickly find. We talked about how at the cross of Calvary, this is page 219 of the story of Sarah Patmos. At the cross of Calvary, love and selfishness stood face to face. Here was their crowning manifestation. Christ had lived only to comfort and bless, and in putting him to death, Satan manifested the malignity of his hatred against God. He made it evident that the real purpose of his rebellion was to dethrone God and to destroy him through whom the love of God was shown. And when the unfallen beings observed that and Satan's true character was shown, then their minds were made up. And Satan, like lightning, fell from heaven. Now it's interesting, and going back to Luke 10, that was after the 70 came back and so enthusiastic and excited because even the devils would obey them. So in their minds also, could it be? And Jesus said, and I saw Satan like lightning fall from heaven. So could it be every time that the further manifestation of the character of God, which further convinces us of what Satan's really like, could it be every time Satan, like lightning, falls from heaven? The deepening of the experience, yes.
Every time there's another manifestation of the character of God.
As we study more and more the character of God, more and more he's magnified, and more we're understanding what Satan really is.
His justice is being dethroned.
Yes, so
that's why I make that point that when we discovered the counterfeit justice of Satan, Brisbane was struck with 265,000 lightning strikes.
Yeah.
Falling from heaven.
Yes.
Is it the same as the perpetual cross?
Yes, I'm wondering if there's something in this.
Well, the only thing that gives Satan his power is what we think.
Yes.
You know, that we've got misconceptions of God. And we have that's right. So each time something changes, then Satan loses his position.
Yes, that's right. If it was simply 2 occasions, he's cast out of heaven and at the cross, and there was nothing else around that, I could accept that. But Christ putting this statement straight after the return of the 70, and particularly referring to the devils, and knowing that it was the revealing of Satan's true character at the cross that sealed the minds of the unfallen beings, that maybe there's something in this that it's
a mental thing more than a physical, Satan leaving heaven physically.
The thought struck my mind is that obviously there is the historical laying out of this story, which is very clearly historically laid out.
Definitely, absolutely, yes.
But the woman labouring to bring forth the man-child is also a reference to the 144,000, for Christ is manifest in the flesh.
In the flesh.
So all of this is played out.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
But you have to anchor it in the historical.
Absolutely.
Thing. So then whatever patterns you would draw from that are correctly filtered through the historical understanding of the passage. And I was just going to say that in Desire of Ages 761, it says Satan saw that his disguise was torn away. This is when Christ died. His administration was laid open before the unfallen angels and before the heavenly universe. He had revealed himself as a murderer by shedding the blood of the Son of God. He had uprooted himself from the sympathies of the heavenly beings. Henceforth his work was restricted. Whatever attitude he might assume, he could no longer await the angels as they came from the heavenly courts and before them accuse Christ's brethren of being clothed with the garments of blackness and the defilement of sin. The last link of sympathy between Satan and the heavenly world was broken.
Right, yeah.
It has to make a point of that also.
Yeah.
He was no longer allowed the gates of heaven.
Yes, he did. He did. That's right. Might just briefly touch on that soon when we get there. Yes, thanks for reminding me of that, Eddie. That's right. The sympathy of heaven was broken. It just seems to me that in a natural condition we are sympathetic to Satan.
Yes.
So how's that broken? It's broken by the revelation of the character of God through his Son Jesus Christ. And so each step along the way,
so that he's not a murderer, he's
not that. That's right. And as we reach these anchor points, Satan is lightning falls from heaven. I now understand that.
Because Ellen White says somewhere, isn't it, where she says that when we finally see Satan, we go, "What? Is that the person or being that's caused the problem?" We're shocked at obviously it's not what we thought.
And it's hidden in plain sight, isn't it? I mean, the greatest fall of lightning from heaven was when I realised my interpretation of Daniel 7, that God is judging us. When that fell away, that that just blew everything apart.
That's right. We have these experiences all the time. It's like this burst of light. Satan falls like lightning from heaven. There's another fallacy gone.
Just
right.
Falls to the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so verse 10. verse 10, and I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. Now in Haskell's, I didn't put this in my lesson, but if I can find this was dealt with quite well by Haskell, Eddie, wasn't it?
Yes.
He talked about how the angels, because, well, Satan was the representative of this earth, and they met at the gates of heaven. And this was what's shown in Job. And he's the accuser of the brethren, so he's accused Job. We know in the book of Zechariah, he accuses Joshua the high priest. He's the accuser, that's what he does, what his name is. The name in Greek, the name in Hebrew is the same thing, he's the accuser. The angels are continually hearing these accusations all the time. Their ears are full of it. But now read this verse again carefully. I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now has come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser, now this is a voice coming from heaven, the accuser of whose brethren? Our brethren. So you can see there's an alignment between heaven and earth. It's not the accuser of our brethren as in one of us saying it. This is heaven saying we are the brethren of heaven. And verse 11.
So verse 10, where is this occurring? Verse 10. When
verse
is
10.
this being spoken?
This is after the death of Christ.
Okay.
So it's the early church.
Yes.
Want me to read what Haskell wrote?
Yes,
Right?
please. Yes, have you got it?
The life of Christ as a man formed the strongest bonds between angels and human beings, so that in heaven men are spoken of as our brethren. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the words of their testimony, and their love for Christ they willingly sacrificed life itself.
Yes.
So, yeah, at the cross there was a bond between humanity and the angels they considered humanity, the brethren.
Our brethren, yeah. An amazing thing, our brethren.
So,
and you're right, in the very next paragraph is, this was at the time of the crucifixion. And while joy rang through heaven and the strains echoed again to his ascension, the world was not yet free from the wiles of the devil. Having been cast to earth, he put forth redoubled efforts to overthrow the truth, and was heralded by followers of the man of Nazareth.
So my question was going to be, how then should we understand the words, now is come salvation and strength, without falling into a dispensational mindset?
Very good question. I was discussing with a person after church, something actually you know, and we came to the conclusion, well, Abraham had salvation.
Correct.
Abel had salvation.
Enoch had it.
Enoch had it. Moses had it.
Why do you think Adam had it?
Adam had it.
Is there a reason given in the verse? And it does have a because clause.
4.
Yeah, so, sorry, Reuben, what are you thinking?
Well, what Adrian was saying, now is come salvation, is because of something. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down. It's kind of like the John 8 story. It's like until agape is expressed, the indignation or eros cannot be revealed. So it's sort of like reverse engineering that. It's like the power of Christ has come, salvation has come, because the accuser of our brethren has come, and he's been cast down, who accused him before God day and night. So condemnation has ceased.
Yeah.
Because condemnation has ceased, the power of Christ has come. But the only reason why condemnation ceased is because you've come to the same conclusion that Mary came when she was condemned.
Yes.
And he says, I don't condemn you.
Yeah.
And it says in, I think it's Thoughts from Mount of Blessings, that she was a different person after that experience. So the flesh had died. And then the power of Christ came, and 6 months later she's there offering up an amazing sacrifice.
Yeah, that's right. That's
So
right.
you're saying the power's always been there. It's not that there's a
Oh,
particular point in
definitely.
time when it happens. It's always
Salvation.
been there. It's only when
It's been
the
realised.
person actually,
That's
Made
right.
manifest.
Made
to
manifest.
accept it.
That's right.
Yeah.
The only thing can be because salvation, as soon as Adam sinned, we had to save it.
Foundation.
There was salvation as soon as ever sin.
It's just as much power of it
With-
can be doing as when he died upon the cross.
That's exactly right.
It was the cross that magnified it.
Yeah.
Seeing it through the cross.
Yes.
So it was properly seen.
Yes.
It was always there.
So when Christ is manifest in the flesh, as it says, the spirit of Antichrist denies that Christ is come in the flesh. When it manifests in the flesh, Satan falls as lightning from heaven and salvation is manifested. It's repeated every time.
Yes. Yes.
But then there's the corporate where we're following along. Because we don't want, what we want to avoid is this dispensational idea that,
That's
well,
right.
there was no salvation
That's
before this
beforehand.
time.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right. Yes, and someone in the other class was arguing that.
I can imagine.
Also, you would know who
My
that
name, sorry.
person is. Yes. The person I was speaking to was a little frustrated about that. So, it might be my class next week. So, anyway, so move on. Verse 11.
Yep.
And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. Who's they? That's right.
The brethren of heaven.
Brethren.
Yes.
Those who have gained power over Satan.
Yes. Now, Haskell speaking about this. Having been cast to the earth, he, the dragon, put forth redoubled efforts to overthrow the truth, as was heralded by the followers of the man of Nazareth. Through the various governments he had worked, only to meet with defeat in the end. Subtlety took the place of opposition. Paganism melted away before the increasing light of the gospel, but pagan principles were accepted by Christians and clothed in the garb of Christianity. Here again is the story of the churches of Pergamos and Thyatira and the fourth seal. Woe to the habitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he has but a short time. And he went on to talk about the persecution, and he links it then to the trumpets and the woes. So, but this is the faith of our fathers, isn't it? They love not their lives unto death. What was top of their mind was preaching Christ and him crucified, and whatever happened, happened. That's faith. That's the faith of Jesus in action, isn't it? And so again, just a few short words. We're looking at the history of the early church and the persecutions. Verse 12. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is, now we just read that from Haskell, having great wrath, because he knoweth he hath but a short time. Now, and Haskell there, I think, I got a bit out of order, talked about the rejoicing in heaven. So heavens were rejoicing because they no longer had the accuser in their ears accusing their brethren. But woe to the earth, because he's down here, and no, he's only got a short time, and his time's even shorter now. And the pagan persecutions were followed by the papal persecutions, just as brutal, if not more brutal. Verse 13 and 14. And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman, which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. So here we have a repeat of the earlier prophecy. There was expressed as 1,260 days. Here we have times, a half a time, which is the same time period.
Yep.
So we're talking about the same prophetic event.
2
witnesses. We know this as the Dark Ages, and the church at that time we know as being the church in the wilderness, and which is why I took this book to show my Sabbath school class, because some of them had heard of it, but most had not. This is the reprint from Teach Services. I also got one of the hardcover originals.
Yep.
I was lucky enough to get one of those. My dear wife, found one on sale at camp last year, the book, second-hand books. She said, "Oh, I think Colin would like this one." Yes, he would, as it turns out.
Good guess.
Yes. So I think I got this one from Steps to Life. But if you haven't read it, do yourself a favour. You read it, Reuben?
No, not completely. I've
Right.
read portions of it.
Right,
It's
yeah.
on Maranatha Media.
Yes. And yeah, I've got an electronic version of it too. It's just an amazing book. If you haven't read it, get it and read it. Just an amazing book.
Who's the author?
Benjamin Wilkinson.
Benjamin Wilkinson, B.G. Wilkinson.
Father, Son, Believer.
Father, Son, Believer. He and his brother Ralph were one of the first, or maybe the first, to alert us to the dangers of the modern translations.
Lord Froome ordered the destruction of the plates of that book.
He did.
So it's an important book to read.
Yes, that's right. Leroy Froome destroyed the...
Strongly recommended it.
Yeah. Anyone who'd read it, well, strongly recommend. Read it. Yeah, it's just an amazing book.
Essential reading.
It is essential reading. That's what I tell my class. Every Seventh-day Adventist should read this book. Because this is our spiritual heritage in here. We did not come out of Protestantism. We came out of the church in the wilderness, doctrinally. Yes, the people who started our church came out of Protestantism, but the doctrines, they're not Protestant doctrines. Protestant, the Reformation did not achieve doctrinal purity. It fell short. Did amazing work. It was God's work, no question about that. But they didn't carry through. And God's true church did not come out of Rome. God's true church came from Israel. And the 2520 proves that.
Yes.
Covering some ground here, aren't we? All right. 15 and 16, and the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman.
I was just going to make a comment on 14.
Sorry. Yes, please do.
Who's feeding the woman?
Who's the one feeding the woman in the wilderness?
So she is nourished times and half a time from the face of the serpent. A good question.
That's an interesting one.
James White advocated in the 1850s that the woman was slowly being fed by the serpent, and that's why she became corrupted.
It's an interesting thought, isn't it?
Smith would say that she was fed away from the serpent so that she's being protected and looked after and cared for. But of the church in the wilderness, the Waldenses and the Albigenses were infiltrated and overcome.
Yes, they were.
So,
and history shows that. That's right. By the time 1798 came around, there was no real entity.
There was nothing left
as such, but the body of beliefs had survived, and that was the thing. The body of doctrine survived it.
So there's no remnant?
Not of that, and this is where we won't do it today, but there's the scattering and the gathering.
Yeah, the scattering.
Yeah. Right. And then in 1798 began the gathering, part of which gathering up was the truth, the gems.
So they had a few names in Sardis that have not denied my name.
Yes, yeah.
A few,
that's right. Yes, fascinating study. So we can only touch the tops of it to try and get through this, and we're spending more time here than what I spent in my Sabbath school class this morning already. All right, so almost there. 15 and 16. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman. The earth opened up her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. There's a lot of symbolic language there. Water. We understand as people, we know the armies came after.
The floods of ungodly men have made me afraid.
That's it. And the earth, they were able to hide in parts of the earth where inaccessible or were hard to get access to. And Waldenses are up in the mountains, and they couldn't fight them by force, so they fought them by subtlety, as you said, infiltrating them, finding where they were. There's some horrific stories coming out of that, people being cast over off the sides of the mountains and all sorts of horrible things.
who climbed that mountain recently.
Yes, I think I do
Castor,
recall you saying that in one of your videos. So, by the time 1798 come around, the actual people, there was just a scattered few that, simply because the Church of Sardis record says they did, but there was no formal body as such. You couldn't point to, that's the remnant of the church in the wilderness.
Isn't that what Wilkins goes through about where it shows in each of the
that's
areas
right,
around the world?
and that's why this book is so important, because he traces it right through, so we can have confidence that the firm and immovable platform of truth put together by our pioneers after 1844, after October 1844, when they went through those times of study when Mrs. White says her mind was locked out, she couldn't understand what they were saying. So when the Spirit of God came upon her, she was not influenced by anything she had heard in terms of relating to them whether or not they had the correct interpretation of what they were studying, or what was the correction that was offered to them. And the other thing that happened was they were shown how to teach what they were finding. And that's an important point.
it may be a bit of cross-pollination, but we have no direct link, obviously, between the Waldenses and Seventh-day Adventists. We don't have anything of this, but you have men like Karlstadt who became a Sabbath keeper. Obviously, these men were aware of the Waldenses.
Yeah.
There was an awareness of these people.
Yes.
And so some of them filtered down, and obviously that filtered through to the Seventh-day Baptists, who then became the ones to bring the Sabbath to Adventists.
Yes, right. Yes.
So it's a very thin thread.
It is a thin thread.
And the Mennonites and some of those brought it through, didn't they? As they went to the Americas.
I haven't read that history.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure the Mennonites.
There's that book. What's it called?
The
Reformers.
Reformers and their stepchildren.
Were the Anabaptists, were they Sabbath keepers?
They were Sabbath keepers.
Yeah, they were the Anabaptists.
Not all of them, but yeah.
Generally, yeah. Yep.
But William Miller himself was inspired directly from him.
Absolutely, he was.
Yeah.
He was led of God, no question. Yeah.
But he never became a Sabbath keeper.
No, he did not.
No.
Yeah.
But he was obviously inspired. So.
He certainly was. So was Luther.
Mm.
Luther wasn't a Sabbath keeper either.
And a Trinitarian to boot. And a Trinitarian to boot.
Yes.
So down to verse 16 then, this is now, so we reached 1798, and that's the history of the church in the wilderness and how the record was preserved. So in just a few words, and there's a lot of history covered by just those few passages.
Yeah.
And now we go down to verse 17 to finish up, and this is now us. This is now speaking post 1798, post 1844, I would argue. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, still with the woman. So this woman has, in some form or another, this woman has come all the way from just before the birth of Christ, all the way now to a remnant of this woman. So the I guess the doctrines, the things that comprised the truth have come all the way down, because this remnant comes from the woman. The dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. So the seed come from the woman. So they've carried forward, so whatever the woman had, everything the woman had when she was travailing to bring forth the man-child, is now transferred down to the seed, the final group that come from this same woman. So it's the same line of truth, we can say, from the remnant all the way back to Israel.
And they keep all the commandments of God.
It's keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, whereabouts was that? I'll just read that. Haskell made that comment, a beautiful comment. We were talking about lunchtime. If I can find it. This was speaking about this towards the end of the chapter, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
It's the last two paragraphs. Yes, I'll read that in a moment. So, So this verse now, this is speaking our time. This brings us down to the time of the end. Because the next chapter then we start dealing with the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. So this summary synopsis of the great controversy is finishing at this point, which is the remnant and the final battle against the remnant. And we recognise the remnant. They have the commandments of God, they keep the commandments of God, and they have this testimony of Jesus, which we know from Revelation 19 verse 10, I think, is the spirit of prophecy. So this is what I put to my class today, and everyone happily agreed with me that the church in the wilderness, this comes from, actually Wilkinson said this in the beginning of his book, and I read this to them, is that, this is how he starts the book, there's a great start in the book. The very first sentence, the church in the wilderness is the connecting link between apostolic Christianity and God's people today. There's the way to start a book. There's the way to, if you want to capture the attention of your readers, that's the way to do it.
That's why Froome wanted it destroyed.
That's why Froome wanted it destroyed, that's right, because it was contrary to what he was wanting to bring in to change our beliefs. Spiritual heritage for us is Israel, the apostolic church, the church in the wilderness, the Seventh-day Adventist church is the string as I understand it. And our doctrinal heritage is through the church in the wilderness, it is not through Protestantism. Because Protestantism came out and did not let go Sunday sacredness, they did not let go immortality of the soul, they did not let go the Trinity.
Luther and Tyndale did give up the immortality of the soul.
Right.
But
Protestantism as a...
It didn't seem to go very far.
Individuals may,
and
but...
a few names.
Yeah, that's it. The Protestantism as a movement did not give up those three key doctrines of error. Yeah, that as well. That's right, the fire god.
The justice god.
Yeah, that's right. Now, certainly the Reformation and Protestantism was the work of God. There's no question about that. And because what it did in rejecting the supremacy of the Pope, they did restore a form of primitive Christianity to Northern Europe, which enabled ultimately the benefit of that went through to the Americas. And that's when we now start to arrive then eventually to William Miller and the period between 1798 1844, which is not particularly here, which I won't particularly deal with today because we're nearly running out of time. All right, and then, so the remnant identify they keep the commandments of God, including the fourth commandment, which the dragon tried to destroy through Rome. They have the testimony of Jesus, which Revelation 19:10 identifies as the spirit of prophecy. And I'll finish with what Haskell said. And these are the two paragraphs by which Haskell, and the paragraphs by which Haskell finished this chapter. He said, John, to whom was made known the revelation of Jesus Christ, was bidden by the Son of God to take the open prophecies of Daniel. Now he's referring there back to Revelation 10, the book, the open book. To take the open prophecies of Daniel. The testimony of Jesus Christ is added to the testimony of these two great prophets. So to Daniel and to John is added the testimony of Jesus Christ. The spirit of prophecy is what Haskell's saying. So that's the picture he's building. The testimony of Jesus Christ is added to the testimony of these two great prophets through a chosen prophet in the remnant church. Through the gift of though the gift of prophecy was long silent, it is in the remnant church. Though the law of God was long degraded and suppressed, it is again obeyed by the remnant. Amen? The wrath of Satan may be great, but he who preserved Christ will preserve his people till the end. The book of Revelation reveals the fact that the remnant church is now in existence and that the time is short. So there's a strong, powerful way to finish. Edifying the gift of prophecy in the remnant church.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
The comment which keep the commandments of God, and today I think, and I'm guilty of this, most Adventists believe, we won't be deceived because we'll be keeping the Sabbath. and they see that keeping the Sabbath is keeping the commandments of God. But to keep the commandments of God is to have the character of God. That's it, not because you're obeying all these laws. And there's only one way you can have the character of God, and that's to have Christ live in you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other question I would pose for you to think about, they keep the commandments of God. Are we talking the 10 Commandments?
Yes.
Not just?
And?
Yeah, that's right. Most people would limit it to the Decalogue.
Yeah.
And particularly the fourth.
And particularly the fourth. Exactly right. Exactly right. All right, so you were blessed because you had more time to go through this than I had in my class this morning.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
So I trust it was a good way to spend the afternoon. Thank you for your input and discussion. Hannah, I just will call on you for just a moment, because what you told me at lunchtime was just brilliant. I would like you to share it with everyone else.
Do tell.
What bit?
No, looks like you're doing a whole lot.
A bit more specific, please.
The bit about how the Protestantism came out of Mother Church and which way they're going to go.
Oh, so in my Sabbath school I asked the young adults whether they thought the church in the wilderness was the Reformation, and a few of them were like, kind of like, yeah, I suppose so. They're like, what do you think? I was like, yeah, suppose not. Yeah, I'm subtle. And so I kind of explained to them why it wasn't, and that although the Protestant Reformation was important to us and how our church got here, that they didn't quite go far enough, that they got the thesis and all the Lutherans and stuff like that, they came to a certain point, but the time that we are in today is when they're coming back. They're coming back to the harlot, as I said in class. They're all returning back to the Mother Church. They're all apologising, all, we're sorry, we didn't mean to run away, Mother, going back. And so that's the time that we're in at the moment. And so they were all like, oh yeah, that's true. I was like, I know it's true. So yeah, is that it?
Thank you, Hannah. So what a great witness. And the young ones got it.
Yeah.
So this is a young person who can reach out to other young people, and possibly in a way that we can't. And that's quite right. We've got Mother Church here, we've got the church in the wilderness, we've got Protestantism in the middle. They had a decision to make. They were part of the 1844 movement, largely.
Wow.
They had a decision to make after the Great Disappointment.
It's like you've got Jesus on one side, you've got Judas on the other, and you've got the other disciples in the middle. Which way they're going to go.
Which way? That's right. That's right. And so many of them have made that decision. And we see the consequences now. They're drifting back towards the Mother and away from the truth, which is tragic. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that, Hannah. I thought it was great to actually explain that. All right, well, I think we've done extremely well, it being now 5:20 in the afternoon. Let's pray to finish. Our Father in heaven, we give you thanks for this time of study and sharing we've had together this afternoon. We give you thanks for Lester's account of the time spent in Cairns last week and continuing witness to his friends up there, David and Sharon, for the sharing with Adrian, with the other group up there, that Adrian was able to speak to the folk from the conference. And Father, we just pray that the Holy Spirit will work upon your people up there, and as they reach back out to church members, they and the church members, as they begin perhaps to be reconciled and to meet together again, that each will be a blessing to the other. And Father, we give you thanks for this Sabbath day that we've enjoyed here together, and for the blessings, for the double outpouring of your Spirit that we have received by faith, and we're so grateful that we're able to do that. give you thanks for this refresher we've had on the 12th chapter of Revelation. We give you thanks for the faithful witness of Stephen Haskell, who wrote down these things for us, and we're so greatly blessed by what he wrote. And Father, as we move forward to the new week, we ask for Spirit to be with us, for the Spirit of Jesus to dwell in us, and for those with whom we come in contact, that they may see Christ in us, and that they will want to know what is this different about us, and that we'll have opportunities to share with them your great love and what Jesus has done. And we pray, Father, that opportunities will arrive, that we can share these things, that we can share the Agape book with people. We know, Father, it's from your leading that we have these resources, we have this book and other things that we can help folk with. And Father, we just pray that when these opportunities arrive, that you'll give us the words, that we'll be open to receiving these words, that we won't have our own minds made up, it won't be us, it'll be Christ in us, and that others can be blessed from being able to witness to them. So Father, I pray for everyone here, I pray for our families, I pray for children. Give you thanks that Ben has come out to join us for a time, that Reuben is back with us, and Father, we just look forward to all fellowshipping together. We give you thanks for what you've given us, Father. In the name of Jesus, we pray all these things. Amen.
Amen. Right, so say goodbye to our online folk.
All
Goodbye.
all